Hi. So, okay, I'll start now. So you got the mic on? Yeah, mic on. Shall we start? Yeah? Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the International Music and Art Society, I would like to welcome you all to our very first in-house program after 18 months. So our discussion for this evening is a book titled The Ambassador and the Private Eye by Mr. Krishnan Srinivasan. We warmly welcome and thank him for accepting our invitation to discuss his book. Welcome, sir.
We had no choice. Urmila Krishnan.
Mr. Srinivasan has served as India's ambassador to several countries. He was India's Foreign Secretary and also served as the Commonwealth Deputy Secretary General for Political Affairs. He is also a historian and a commentator on international affairs. He is a columnist and a book reviewer for several Indian dailies. The book we are about to discuss is his sixth work of fiction. And in conversation with Mr. Srinivasan is Dr. Indira Chandrasekhar. Indira is a scientist, a writer, a literary curator, and the founder and principal editor of Out of Print, which is one of the primary platforms for short fiction connected to the Indian subcontinent. Her collection of short stories, Polymorphism, was published by HarperCollins. She was co-editor of Pangea, an anthology of stories around the world published by Thames River Press. Indira has won awards and has appeared in anthologies and literary journals across the world. She is also associated with a number of cultural organizations, including the Bangalore International Center and the International Music and Arts Society. Welcome, Indira. And moderating the discussion today is Mr. Stanley Pinto.
I hope you say at least as much for me.
Now, Mr. Pinto is truly a Renaissance man,
Right.
and versatile in many disciplines. Yeah. He is an advertising magnate, a bon vivant, a humorist, a lover of the arts, an actor, a musician, a writer, and not to mention not to leave out, a food and wine connoisseur. He is an elitist in the sense of leading and encouraging others to join him in enjoying life to the fullest. Mr. Pinto, welcome. And now a little about the book. The story revolves around two people investigating crimes in Calcutta, Koel Deb and Michael Marco. Koel Deb is a born achiever. She was once a lady police officer who was rapidly advancing in her career when she suffered a severe setback, an accident, which caused her arm to be amputated. As a result, she had to leave the police force. So, what does this young, beautiful, and energetic Harley-riding ex-policewoman do? Well, she reinvents herself as a private detective, a reputable one at that, and pursues cases in murder, arson, theft, and disappearance. In complete contrast, Michael Marco is an aging but insightful Somalian ambassador whose nation is in shambles. And worse, he is stranded in Calcutta. He more or less regards his life and career as over. And when Koel meets Michael, she is touched by his old world curiosity, his logic and laconic words. This unlikely duo get together. They use their separate skills of bravado and intellect and go about solving crimes together. They inspire each other. So besides criminality, the storyline traces a real affection that develops between the laconic Michael and the enthusiastic Koel. Well, I look forward to reading this book, as I'm sure all of you will. So, after the book discussion, I'm sure that some of you will have questions. So we'll have a short 15-minute Q&A session. And now over to our distinguished panel.
You said something about being stranded in Calcutta. That's something that's bound to get my goat. Because if you are fortunate enough to be stranded in Calcutta, you are stranded in the most civilized city in this country. I went there once for 2 years and stayed for 12. And I'm sorry that I left it when I did. I do go back every now and then, but that's me in Calcutta. And Ambassador Srinivasan here is a son-in-law of Calcutta. So he better think well of the city if he knows what's good for him. Well, I'm now going to address you familiarly as Krish, if only because I'm older than you, damn it. Krish, why detective stories? You keep writing, as a former ambassador, you keep writing very important stories, articles, essays on diplomacy and what else? Diplomacy and commentaries on international affairs. You're a columnist for the Hindu and the Deccan Herald and so on and so forth. And then suddenly out of nowhere comes a series of detective stories. Why?
Well, it makes a nice change, I think, Stanley. But since I'm reduced to Krish from Krishnan, I should call you Stan.
Yes,
Stanley.
always.
Is that all right with you? But firstly, before going to that quite...
Please do not call me Ind.
Before going to the your very pertinent question, I'd like to thank the Music and Art Society for hosting this event, also the BIC. I was here many years ago. It's always a pleasure to come back to the BIC. So thank you, Stanley. It's an important but relevant question. I think the short answer is you don't need to have footnotes when you write fiction. So you can give free rein to your imagination. You don't need any references. But that's one part of it. The other part of it is simply that one feels one has something to say. And one has these characters in one's head. Sometimes they live there for a long time, and you like eventually to put them on paper.
But why did a detective find herself into your head, as you put it?
Yes, I think you know, in India there are very few private detectives. In the title of the book it says Private Eye. The private eye comes from private investigator, and in America they shortened that to private eye. That's the I of the alphabet, the small I, and the I got transferred, evolved into EYE, I, so private eye. Now the private eye in India is a fairly disreputable chap, nearly always a chap, and not a lady, and usually pretty disreputable, as we can find from the latest Aryan Khan case in Mumbai, where there's a highly disreputable private investigator whose name is Kiran Gosavi, who's now accused of umpteen malefactions, which I'm sure are true. But in any case, this is not a very good career to have a good reputation. And I was wanting to break the mold because there are hardly any female private eyes in India. I don't think there are any at all. Perhaps there are one or two, but very, very few. And I wanted to have a private eye who was a woman, extremely brave, dashing, courageous, energetic, and contrast that with, as the introducer said, with a aging, rather disillusioned Somali ambassador who was stuck in India because he doesn't have a country to go back to, and he doesn't have too much money either. So he's finding a way to get back home. And when these two come together, it's a contrast. The old and the young, the African, the Indian, the man, the woman, etc.
Indira, do you have any thoughts about what this book tells you about detectives? and privatize?
Yes, well, first of all, I did take out my black jeans and leather jacket in honor of Koel Deb, and thought about wearing it for this evening, but then it, doesn't really. Stanley thinks I'm 70, so I just felt
But
that I couldn't wear that.
a 70-year-old woman in jeans and a black jacket, I could fall for you any time. In fact, the thought of it is turning me up.
And the motorcycle outside.
But in any case, so yes, so Koel Deb is really a character, and I liked her because, as you say, she's really brave, and she's extraordinary. She dashes into all these situations which are scary and dangerous, and often disillusioning, often involving people whom she knows and is fond of, and so it's she's really a fantastic character. I'm glad you created her. The one thing that struck me about the whole, I know you'll get to Calcutta again because that is so much a part of this book, but the one thing that struck me is I don't know how much of the audience watches cheesy detective stories on television and YouTube and so on. Yes, there goes Lata's hand. And there are these, there's St. Mary Mead with Miss Marple, and then there's Bergerac with his tiny little town somewhere, and Midsummer Murders set in Midsummer, which all have a population of about, 20,000, maybe 3,000 even. And by the time the series is finished, you're surprised anyone's left standing. And I thought, how clever of you to set it in Calcutta with a large enough population to kill off a few and still be a seething urban cosmopolitan place.
But tell me, Krishnan, who is your favorite detective in fiction? I have a sense of who it might be, but why don't you tell us?
Well, I've read quite a few detective stories and find myself quite enthusiastic about the leading character, usually, whether it's Poirot or Mrs. Marple or any of the others. I think that Sherlock Holmes, of course, but Stan Spade, Mickey Spillane, but in the end, I think I have to say my all-time favorite is a person called Inspector Maigret.
Of course.
You've obviously read of him, and you've probably read Georges Simenon's books. Unfortunately, Georges Simenon is now dead, so Maigret is also dead. But I think at that time, Maigret was really my favorite gumshoe.
India, I don't know whether you would agree with me, but I get the impression, I'm reminded of Sherlock Holmes' story when I read this book, because most Sherlock Holmes stories, you start with a problem, could be a murder, could be a theft, could be any such thing, all of which, one way or the other, are in one of your stories. And then up comes Sherlock Holmes and solves the whole problem in one page. And that's more or less the way it is in your book, because the young lady gets into the kind of thing she wants to, murders, this, that, and the other, and she comes back and tells the detective all about what she's been up to or what's happened around her, and he thinks about it and expands on what the reason must be and what the solution is. For me, that's quintessential Sherlock Holmes. Would you not agree, Indy? What do you think?
Yes, very much. It's deduction rather than detection.
That's right.
In that sense.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
It does make one feel a little small, though, because, actually the reader is offered more or less the same information that this wonderful ambassador from Somali ambassador has, but he's so much cleverer, and then he gets straight to it, and you think, oh gosh, I'm left behind. I want to be as smart as him. But I did have a question, actually, because if I may, Stanley, yes. I thought that, the other principal character, apart from Koel Deb, is obviously Michael Marco. And I thought, here is this wonderfully graceful, gracious, retiring, reticent gentleman, but incisiful, as the blurb says, with this sharp intellect. And I just wondered whether it's faintly autobiographical.
Good heavens. Good heavens, no. But you've got a point here, because there was, in fact, well, the kind of hero of all these stories, all the 6 actually, which I've written, this is the 6th, have the same lead character, and that is, as I said, an African from Italian Somaliland. So, Somalia was colonized by 3 different countries, the British, the French, and the Italians. Now, this gentleman was from the Italian part. The capital is still Hargeisa, and therefore he is a Roman Catholic, and he has an Italian name, Michael Marco. Now, there was a real Michael Marco, and I met him on my first diplomatic ambassadorial assignment, which was in Zambia. Now, those were the bad old days of imperialism and colonialism, and nearly all of Southern Africa was under imperial rule. Now, Michael, who arrived in Lusaka a little bit after me, I think, was the most retiring of men. He already was, let's say, of an advanced age, and he shrunk into corners at cocktail parties. He was ever so shy. He never introduced himself. You had to make an effort to go and talk to him. And he was shy and diffident even when you did. Much later, I think just before I left Zambia, I discovered that he was the focal point for the supply of weapons to Namibia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, it was then called Southern Rhodesia, and South Africa. So he was in touch with all these liberation movements, and he was the main conduit of weapons. You would never have thought so. So he became my fictional hero. Much later, actually on my next posting, which was in New York, I met Michael Marco again. And he was then representative of the OAU, which is the Organization of African Unity. It's changed its name now, but that's what it was called, and he was representing the entire African continent. Still very shy, still very reticent, and at that time, of course, I had no idea of writing any novels. That was only after I retired. But Michael Marco remained in my mind, and still does, and it was my great tragedy, and my fault entirely, I lost touch with him. Because in the days before email, we had to write letters longhand, and I was always very bad at that. So I don't know where he is, if he's still alive, very unlikely, of course. He probably is not in Somalia because the country is in ruins, but he was a genuine person, straight out of fiction, but in reality.
What astonishing lives these ambassadors live. I'm looking at Lata, and I'm wondering what's hiding behind that mask. Anyway, I don't know how many of you have read the book already. Has anyone? Well, I hope you do. They're available outside, by the way, at a very special price. Only this evening. So when you do, you will discover that there's an elegance in the use of the language. Now you can read detective stories by everybody, including Mickey Spillane. Where when I read Mickey Spillane, I'm not looking for elegance. But even Agatha Christie, even the elegance in this particular book, let me read a couple of those. I made a note of that. Let me see now. He uses the English language so beautifully, you wouldn't think it ought to be in a detective story. But what the hell, why not? Let me see now. Page 11. Forgotten at home, considered of little significance elsewhere, I look with a benevolent eye upon all who pass by on the other side. I look with a benevolent eye upon all. Where do you get that kind of language? Look with a benevolent eye. Here's another one. There followed a lengthy silence, but in Michael Marco's presence, it was a companionable, even intimate one. You won't find that in Mickey Spillane, or even Agatha Christie. Let me see. I must read the ones I found particular. The same grizzled man loped back towards my car. Now, most other people would say, the same old fella walked up to my car. But this chap writes, the same grizzled man loped back toward my car. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? Yeah. Get a lot, crap. Here's another one. Lawyers don't work according to an ethical compass.
Yes, I love that.
I've heard lots of things said about lawyers, most of them, of course, derogatory, but never one as an elegant slap in the face as lawyers don't work according to an ethical compass. And then refers to someone making an observation and say, a Delphic observation. Now, I had to look up the dictionary to find out what Delphic meant in this context anyway. And finally, let me see. He had a noble face, going a little heavy in the jowls, and his eyes held that smug look of inbred self-satisfaction they seem to give out with graduation certificates at Doon School. Now, that's the kind of elegance that is wonderful to read. So make sure you get the book. It's available out there. Special price. You know, what would be fun was if you read one of your favorite paragraphs, even though you wrote it yourself. Okay. Would you like to try some of that? After me.
Yes.
Can I borrow your book for a moment?
Yes, certainly.
Stanley, that was very flattering. Thank you very much. I think you rather underestimate the Indian Foreign Service. You ought to read some of the dispatches that my colleagues and I have written in the past. But I do agree they probably sounded more like fiction than fact. Anyway, thank you very much for this opportunity to read a bit from the book. I don't think my excerpt is going to be very Shakespearean, but anyway, you know that the book has a narrator, and that is the private investigator, Koel Dev, and she narrates right through the book, and one of her great skills, apart from...
Sorry, he said something about it not being Shakespearean. One thing you ought to know about this book, it's the only detective book I've read in which Alexander Pope, Boswell, Descartes, Gibbons, Chekhov are quoted. Would Mickey Spillane know Chekhov, let alone quote him? After you, Krishnan.
Good. So this private investigator, Koel, unmarried, about mid-30s, she is the investigator, and she's a superb narrator. In fact, at one stage in the book, she is compared to Homer because her narrative is so precise. It enables Michael Marco, who doesn't move very far from the hotel lobby, to understand what's going on. And incidentally, you're all invited somewhere. Yeah, it says in the book, it says on the jacket cover, the clues are all there, which they are, and you are invited as the reader to solve each case before the detective. So, you'll get to a point where you can solve it yourself. Now, this is Coel Dave speaking about a cocktail party. It was there by the poolside while I was circulating aimlessly, looking for someone I could talk to, that I was accosted by Vinod Kashyap, dressed in a Western-style dinner jacket suit, which he sported incongruously with an open-necked dress shirt and brown shoes. "Coel Dave," he proclaimed, scooping up a couple of whiskies from a circulating tray and handing me one. "That wouldn't be Private Eye, Coel Dave." I admitted it was so. "Not very private if you speak so loudly." He laughed as if it was the best joke he'd ever heard, and he clamped my right hand with his arm. Kashyap was a stocky man, becoming bald, and his face and head were shiny with sweat. "I read in the newspapers that you are the best in the business, Miss Dave," he declared. "And I, the movie producer Vinod Kashyap, am the best in my business. If we get together, it could be that you will save my life, though I sometimes wonder whether it's worth the trouble." Vinod Kashyap was accordingly proving himself to be the typical Bollywood tycoon, alternately boastful and self-deprecating, which made me thankful that I worked out of Calcutta and not in the maximum city. Kashyap steered me out of the reception to an inside lounge and some vacant settees. We sat. He came beg your pardon. He came straight to the point. "Someone is going to kill my wife," he confided. "If she gets killed, there goes my film on Siraj-ud-Dawla, Nawab of Murshidabad. Not to mention the 85 crores of Gateway Studios money. If that happens, the movie crowd wouldn't give me the job of sweeping out the latrines." "Why do you assume someone is going to kill your wife, Mr. Kashyap?" I asked him politely, "the way you try to mollify an insistent drunk." "Because I hired the guy to do it," he said indignantly. After hearing that, I paid him greater attention.
India, what else?
Yes, I certainly will. But no problem. But I wanted to say this, in fact, reminded me of something that struck me when I started reading the book, which was, this reminded me of a detective, set of detective stories, Donna Leon. I don't know if you know them. They're set in Venice. And Venice is, known for being an incredibly corrupt and complex city, I suppose, and for many years. And so the Donna Leon stories really reveal one after another of the corruption scandals, as it were, in Venice, and they're wonderful. And I thought you really covered everything here. I mean, there's the real estate, there's the film industry, there's family drama, there's the tea estates. It's wonderful. You really sort of painted a picture of the whole area and the city and the region. So thank you for that. Did you want to respond?
There's a paragraph.
Oh, sorry. I stand corrected. No, that's all right.
Well, I think I was asked about Calcutta. Stanley has also referred to it. I think it's a wonderful city. It's 20% cheaper than any other city in India, which makes it particularly attractive for people like me. But apart from that, Satyajit Ray said that this is a city of a teeming city where there is there is a blurred distinction between right and wrong, and between the ugly and the beautiful. I think that
contrasts of sight and sound and relief.
That's right.
That's what Satyajit Ray wrote.
So I think that it's a very good venue for tales of this kind.
Thank you. Actually, when you asked me, Stanley, if I would read something from the book, I don't have a favorite. There's so many bits that I really found most interesting. And there was one from, is it called The Fire? Something?
Down below.
The Fire Down Below, in the opening paragraphs where you sort of set up the character is so brilliant, and the relationship that Koel Dev has with this character, which is very minimal, really, and then leads us down this extraordinary path of deduction by Michael Marco. But I'm going to read from towards the end of the book, which is in fact something that you talked about when we were, speaking earlier, which is about the relationship that develops between Michael Marco and Koel Dev, and it's really rather nice. So I hope it won't give away too much, but I'm going to read a little bit from there. So it's called The Prodigal, the chapter. And that's really referring to the deduction that takes place through this chapter later. Quite an extraordinary story too. But this is the beginning of it. "You never tell me anything about yourself, Michael," protested Koel. Michael Marco sat back and looked at her amiably. "I wish there was something interesting to say, dear Minnie. I sit here in this hotel, learn from the Holy Bible, listen to the radio news, read the newspapers, and go for solitary walks around the Dhakuria lakes. I am, like Mr. Wilkins Micawber, forever waiting for something to turn up, or perhaps more like Godot. More precisely, I wait for the lawyers here and in Somaliland to set up the legal structures to start us working on the children's charities we have in mind. You and Tatiana," she's another character, "will work together?" "Well, yes, and also Miss Tatiana's father, Mr. Vacher, and her future husband, Mr. Svenam, when they can spare the time. The Vacher family have been immensely generous when it comes to establishing the foundation. I have no way to pay them back, but I want to do something useful in the remaining years of life left to me. Will you go away as soon as your foundation is established?" "Yes, I hope so, Minnie. At my age, I have no time to lose, but the labors of the lawyers are like the mills of the Almighty and grind very slowly indeed. I can only hope I will be able to travel while my pension from the United Nations allows me to buy my air ticket and my passport remains valid. For a man without a country, a passport of some kind becomes vitally important. Tatiana told me that the Indian government had given you its highest award. She's very kind. She should not have mentioned it. I do not consider it of any importance because I did not deserve any such honor. My question, Michael, is whether India would not give you a passport if you needed one. I do not know about such things. I do not know about such things. I do not think so, dear Minnie, and I would never ask for one. I would like to return to my country with the only passport I have, even if it is not recognized by Somaliland. And then here's this line which is sort of leads you into what's coming next, which is awfully touching. Koel considered a while and said shyly, and actually shyness is not something that is a characteristic of hers, so I found that very, very sweet and sort of a signal to pay attention. Koel considered a while and said shyly, I would like to work for your foundation in Somaliland, Michael, if you will have me. So there we are. It's setting her up for extending this relationship and this friendship, and it's lovely, actually.
To another book, perhaps.
Yes.
Well, I've never been in Somalia, so the only person I know personally who's been in Somalia is MJ Akbar, and I don't think he's going to tell me enough about it for me to write another story. But I would love to actually take Michael Marco to his own country. But if I may just say, if you allow me, just to say one word about what Indira has just read out. Actually, this is perhaps superficially a story of detection and deduction. A female who does the detection and a man of my age sitting in a hotel lobby doing the deduction. But actually, while there are all these episodes of the various crimes they look into in Calcutta, it is actually a love story. And that's really, I think, the right emphasis that Indira has given to this book. It is a love story that develops between two very unpromising characters.
The paragraph that I chose to read What kind of cases does a private eye in Kolkata investigate? He asked. Murders, larcenies, blackmails? And she replies, 70% of the fatalities in our state of West Bengal are from avoidable road accidents. But that still leaves a lot left over. There was a quotation I learned at convent school that the Bengali indulges in big promises, excuses, falsehoods, chicanery, perjury, and forgery, which are the weapons of the people in the lower Ganges, namely right here. The nuns use these words to caution us against the sinister attention of the boys in the school next door. Now, isn't that lovely? That's absolutely lovely. It says so many interesting things. You know, one of the delights about reading this book was all those places in Calcutta, Kolkata, as you call it. I hate to call it Kolkata. I call it Calcutta. Yes, I don't know. The only change of city that I absolutely agree with is Bombay. It's become Mumbai after the Shiv Sena took over. Everything is Chhatrapati Shivaji. There are two major railway terminuses, and they're both Chhatrapati Shivaji. Anyway, I will not deign to respond to that. It will always be Bangalore to me, as I suspect it would be to quite a few people here. Yes, there you go. All right, but these wonderful locations in Calcutta, Howrah, Lal Bazar, Bhavanipur, Belur, Behala, Prinsep Ghat. I love Prinsep Ghat. I used to go there often enough to Prinsep Ghat. Wonderful place. These locations in Calcutta that you cover really brought, well, not quite a tear to my eye, but maybe a little tear in my heart, because I left my heart behind in Calcutta when I left there a long, long, long time ago. I think I'll stop here now, if you don't mind, Indy, unless you have something to say.
No.
And throw it open for any queries from the audience.
I mean, I have a lot.
Do we have any questions? Any questions? Any questions?
So while people are gearing up for their questions, I thought I would just say one thing, which was you asked why you wrote this book in some senses. This is, I mean, the character, Michael Marco, is gentle and a gentleman, but the stories are wicked and dangerous and naughty and, well, naughty might be exaggerating, but bad stories. And so, I mean, you know, they're stories about violent crime in that sense. So it's not a gentle book, but because it's rendered through these characters, it acquires a certain gentleness, which is lovely, actually.
I found it easy to read, Krishnan, because, you know, one of the couple of ways in which I'm showing my age is that I find it hard to focus when I'm reading a book. I was a voracious reader, and I have a library of probably 3,000 books in my home. But now I buy books and start to read them, and after about 10 pages, I can't read them anymore. And one reason I like your book is because it has 12 stories in it. It's 300 and odd pages, but 12 stories. So it's possible for me to read one story at a time over a period of 2 weeks. That's a sales pitch for those of you who haven't yet bought a copy. You will enjoy it, I promise you. Okay, questions? Questions? Anand, why don't you kick it off? You must have a question. You always do. You're a troublesome bugger. No? Oh dear. Yes, Nirvama, please.
So you worked in Delhi for many years as a part of, you know, your life in the Foreign Service, Did you ever think of setting a detective story in Delhi?
Yes.
He'd probably get arrested
I did.
as an anti-social or anti-state or anti-country or whatever.
Well, that actually is rather a pertinent comment. But anyway, yes, you're right. I did work, for about a third of my government career in Delhi. And I mentioned that Michael Marco has been my consistent kind of theme during all these novels, these fiction books. He begins correctly, chronologically in southern Africa. And then I take him to Libya, where I was again posted. And there he is looking into a case of Libya developing a nuclear bomb, which they were indeed trying to do at one time. Then I take him to London, where I was posted. And there he gets involved with crimes in the African community in London. Then I bring him to Sweden, where I did a fellowship at Uppsala University. And there he, again, has to unravel a complicated case. Then I take him to Delhi. That was my fifth book. He is based in Calcutta, but he's called to Delhi by the government who's heard about him. And there is, needless to say, a tension between India and Pakistan. And so he gets involved with that. And due to his efforts, as Indira's little extract that she read out states, he was given a very high decoration by the Indian government for his pains. And towards the end of the book, he gets involved with the Naxalite movement in Bengal as well. Then finally, he just stays in his hotel room and deals with some cases that come to him through the agency of this private eye. And so he has been in Delhi, but my previous stories haven't been really of this kind. This is more or less it's more or less a detective novel, though I see it as a romance, but it's superficially a detective series of detective stories. But my other books have been very political. They've been much less deduction and much more diplomacy, where Michael Marco really uses diplomatic skills and not deductive skills. So yes, he was in Delhi doing this quasi-diplomatic business, trying to settle something between India and Pakistan. And there I take him to a military cantonment outside Delhi. I take him to the India International Center and the Gymkhana Club and places like that.
Are all of these books available on Amazon?
Yes, I think sadly...
There you are, remember?
Sadly,
buy them all.
Sadly,
you can read all about it in Delhi and everything else.
But sadly, some are out of print, I think, now.
Ah.
But this has covered a span of 15 years, so some are out of print. But the last one is called Ambassador Marco's Indian Instincts, and that should be available. That was, 3 years ago, perhaps.
So you were writing them, you were writing about Ambassador Marco in Libya when you were posted in Libya?
No, I'd left.
Okay.
I'd left Libya.
Okay.
He's not going to write when he's posted there.
I
Gaddafi will have his
wondered.
head.
I know. So
I really would like to do one on Somalia, a final one,
Yes.
taking Michael Marco home after all these years, but I can't write about something I haven't experienced. So that doesn't look very likely at the moment.
Were you in Libya when Gaddafi was...
What about Michael Marco and the Somali pirates?
Somali pirates?
Well, that would be inevitable. Inevitable if he goes back home, that's true. But Stanley, your question was regarding?
Were you in Libya when Gaddafi was...
Oh, yes. I've been in Libya, in 2 countries where there have been revolutions. And I must say that I wouldn't like to be in a third one. One was in Libya when Gaddafi, there was King Idris at the time when I was posted there, and the king was deposed by a group of very, very young, very junior military officers. I think the most senior one was a lieutenant colonel, all the rest were lieutenants. And that was a mysterious thing because no one knew their names except for number one man, Gaddafi, and the number two man, a man called Jaloud, who was allowed to kind of deal with government business publicly. All the rest, there were 12 of them. 10 of them were completely unknown till years and years later. In fact, one's identity only became known after he died, after Gaddafi had killed him, actually. And the other coup was in Bangladesh, when in 1991, when I was there, when a popular uprising overthrew the military government of General Ershad. So that was a very different kettle of fish.
May I ask a question? May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yes.
So I've dealt with you professionally, so I was very pleasantly surprised to see this creative genius of your book. I haven't read the book as yet, but you mentioned that it was a love story. And I'd like to ask you why the beautiful Koel had to lose a hand.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it doesn't mean anything, as I'm sure Lata and Nirupama would agree, but, you know, she came top of the civil service exam. And much to the surprise of her friends, and she was a brilliant student at university, and she came top of this civil service exam, which is a bit of a lottery, of course, but, and her friends were amazed that she chose to join the police, and not, you know, the IAS and IFS and so on. And when she was asked about this, she said that she wanted to do something for women because women were the most persecuted section of Indian society. Now, I believe that very strongly, personally. But she then joins the police, and she's so clever that she becomes a deputy commissioner of police very, very quickly, much in advance of her normal age group. And then she's sent on a rapid action force team to, where was it now? I've forgotten. To Serampur or somewhere like that. And in this encounter with the criminals, she gets shot. She's the only person who is wounded. And she gets shot in the upper arm, and they have to amputate because they have to treat it immediately. She's taken to a hospital and her arm is amputated, therefore she's invalided from the police. But when she's invalided from the police, in a police auction, she buys the Harley Davidson and she buys a Glock pistol, which she uses only once in the book. Doesn't she? Yeah, just once in the book.
Chris, you've written fiction, you've written non-fiction, and you've written poetry. Which of the three did you enjoy writing most?
Well, I think fiction for sure. I mean, the poetry was very long ago, and I don't write anything as clever as that anymore. I think, yes, the novel is a very good medium, because if you have something to say, you can put it in the mouths of somebody else. And, you know, that's a great advantage, I think. And then, as Stanley hinted, you don't get persecuted by the government for anti-national activities or anything, because it is fiction.
Don't count on it. Not these days, don't count on it.
So I had a question for you, if there's no one from the audience. Oh, there is? Okay.
There's one in the back there. And a gent.
Yes, of course.
And a gent in brown.
Good evening. I have a question actually about your process. What does a typical writing day look like for you?
Say it again.
What does a typical writing day look like for you? What's your process?
Gosh, it's very amateurish, I think. Well, I think about the plot and the characters a lot. I might take half a year thinking about the plot, the characters. When I start writing, it comes rather quickly because I can hear it in my head. I can hear the dialogue in my head. So it comes really quite quickly, but I've thought about it a great deal. And I think my real difficulty is finding something to hang a plot on. When I have that eureka moment and I can find something that interests me enough to wrap a story around it, then I spend many, many months thinking about it. I'm thinking about it even when I'm talking to people. So when I start writing, and I usually do that straight onto a word processing machine, it goes quite fast. I usually don't spend more than about 3 months writing it out.
I think time for one last question. There's a lady in pink at the back.
I was just wondering when your spy versus spy book will come out. Is there a spy versus spy book in the offing?
Is there a spy
rather than
spy?
detectives?
Is there a spy versus
And Marco
spy?
is you, right?
In the works.
He said no.
No, I mean, I'm trying to think about it. I've met a few spies in my life. In fact, on one occasion in Beirut, there was this classical, semi-mythological event where I was meeting someone with a rolled newspaper under his arm. So I've met a few of those, but no one has interested me enough to create a story around them, I must say. So no, at the moment I can't think of anyone anything that makes me feel that I'd like to do that.
No Mata Hari.
She wasn't very successful, was she?
Yes.
Just speak.
Yes, well, I think it's close enough for me to, yeah, just two comments rather. I haven't read the book, which I'm really looking forward to, but one
The
was...
questions don't have to be to me, they can be to...
Well, I mean to all of you actually, but does the city of Calcutta become a kind of character in the book? I mean this, like you have magical cities, like when you talk of Paris or New York, these cities are often used as people, as a backdrop. And so I was wondering that. And then secondly, you were talking about your time in Libya. And I partly grew up in Libya. And it was really, you would really think that it's not spy country. This was
to your mouth.
Pre-Gaddafi years, just at the time of King Idris was still there. And with Gaddafi, of course, he was sent in exile to Rome. But just before that, you did get the feeling that Tripoli was a hub of Italians and the French and the British and the Americans, because they had the Wheelers Air Force field at that time. So was that, I can imagine that was very inspirational for you, that sort of international atmosphere of Tripoli. That, I mean, when you think of this character of Marco from Somalia, you had people like that. I mean, I can just, even though I was very young at the time, but I do remember with my parents, seeing these characters, these type of people, that you've sort of described.
Well, I think that Calcutta is, to my mind, a very intriguing city. I think as Satyajit Ray said, the distinctions between morality, immorality, good and bad, the noble and the infamous, these distinctions are blurred in Calcutta. And it is, one of the two cities in the world which still has Raj architecture. I mean, I know every city has Raj architecture in India, but to some extent, but nowhere to the extent of Calcutta, and the other city, of course, is Rangoon. These have given a certain atmosphere to the city which is very cosmopolitan, if you like, because Calcutta was the second city of empire, and it attracted people, carpetbaggers and aristocrats and novelists and people from all over the world, apart from the Bengalis being there. And so it does lend itself to a certain degree of mystique. Let's just leave it like that. In regard to Libya, yes, I mean, Libya, I mean, such a sad country. When you were there, of course, it was a charming Italianate city, because I presume you were in Tripoli and not in Benghazi. Yeah, because it was a very, very Italian city with palazzos, and the post office was a grand building and so on. But now I think I was there when the changes took place, and the changes were really to Arabize the entire country, and it changed very considerably. It's that Arab Libya that Michael Marco goes back to because of the development of what they think is a nuclear device being developed by the government there. And his interactions, diplomatic interactions, are with a member of the Revolution Command Council, as it was called, that group of shadowy people who ran the country.
There's a glass of wine outside with my name on it, and I'm beginning to thirst for it. Do we have any more questions?
I'm going to be awful and just ask one last question, which is, well, Lata said you've written poetry and you've written, of course, non-fiction, fiction. Would you ever be writing film scripts?
Well, you know, I'm a complete novice at this, but there have been some people in Calcutta who are in the kind of the fringes of the film profession.
Hollywood.
Yes, precisely. And an actor who starred in one of Satyajit Ray's great films is a friend of mine. And when he read the book, he said, you know, this is quite filmic. That was when it started. And then we found a scriptwriter who is now trying to develop an abstract for a film production company. Now, you know, these are very early days, and she's already heavily engaged and very handsomely paid doing film scripts for you know, Netflix-type productions in Bombay. So she has very limited time for my little book. But she's working on something, and it may take years. I may not be alive when it happens, but I hope it happens one day. You probably remember a novel called Shantaram, which was a tremendous hit, you know, not only in India, but all over the world. It's set in Mumbai, in the criminal life in Mumbai. And it was then picked up by Hollywood. There was, I think, a director was named and one or two star actors. It's now 25 years and we still haven't seen the film. So you never know. You really never know. Thanks for asking.
Stanley,
one can only hope.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
I said, I'm sorry, now that wine is really calling out. Glass of wine.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, on behalf of the International Music and Arts Society, I would like to call on Mrs. Vani Rajaram to present our esteemed panel a token of appreciation. Vani Reddy, sorry, I stand corrected. Vani Reddy.
I think that's outside.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Mrs. Indira Chandrasekhar, Mr. Srinivasan, Mrs. Indira Chandrasekhar, and Mr. Stanley Pinto. Thank you all for coming and participating and making it a lively and entertaining evening. The book is available outside for sale at a very special price. And now please do join us for refreshments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.